enter into our words of prayer to go into the Torah study that we'll have today, or the Haftarah study that we'll have today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah Haftarah la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yadadai-dai-dai-dai. So good to be with you all. Rabbi Catherine's joining us. Wonderful. And we are going to move into our second Haftarah portion of the year. Last week, we were learning a little bit about Isaiah and the second half of Isaiah. This week, we are also in the second half of Isaiah, just a few chapters later. So let me get our sheet up. There we go. Can everyone see this? Yes? Fabulous. So essentially, last time there were questions about Jewish history and kind of how things fell contextually with what we were doing in the text. And I am absolutely not a historian. I will give you the bare essentials just to kind of understand some of the context. If you are more of a historian and would like to bring in some of that, you are more than welcome to do so. I know text a lot more than I know history, but I do know that the pieces that are here are right. So somewhere around the year 930 BCE, Israel split into two different kingdoms. And there was a reason they split into two different kingdoms. Essentially, Solomon had taxed the northern kingdom in a way that made them really uncomfortable. And when his son rose to power, rather than listening to them and adjusting, he doubled down. And so the north was pretty upset and ended up creating a split so that there was the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And this map kind of gives an idea of what that looks like. Just to kind of take that in, you'll notice that Jerusalem is in the kingdom of Judah, but it's not so far off from the kingdom of Israel. So that's what was going on around that time. And okay, and it was Rehoboam under whom that happened. Then in around 722 BCE, the Assyrian army conquered northern Israel, so conquered the kingdom of Israel, but they actually wouldn't last all that long. And by 610, they would fall to Babylonia. Now, Babylonia also began to attack in the kingdom of Judah. And in the year 586 BCE, that's when the temple was destroyed, if you remember, in Jerusalem. And many Jews were actually sent to Babylon and so on. At that time, a lot of life was lost. It was not awesome. So that's what was happening then. Our Haftarah portion, scholars believe, was likely written in the 6th century, and there's all sorts of reasons in this text that contextualize it there. Yeah, Jessica.
The destruction in 586, that was the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, our Haftarah portion, if we really kind of go through Isaiah between chapters 40 and 66, there are some little pieces, some inklings of some of the kings under the Assyrian army that we're referenced to in the not so distant past at this point, right? There is reference to the Babylonians, and there is also reference to what will come a little bit later, which is Persia. Sorry about that. So in around the year 539, also BCE, of course, Persia conquers Babylonia. That's where we have the story of Purim and all of that fun stuff. And this time, the Persians actually allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. And around 516 BCE, they were able to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. That is moving toward the second temple. So I hope that that contextualizes us a little bit within Isaiah 2. Are there any questions about any of this?
Was that Cyrus the Great who allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did the Assyrians, they took slaves and prisoners, didn't they, back to Assyria when they conquered Israel?
Yes. And that was also true of the Babylonians. That was true under their rulership as well. I don't know all the details of that. I've learned all this stuff, but I'm very much not a history person. I'm doing my best just to contextualize, but there are better people who can teach this than me. But by all means, like, if you want to bring anything in that you're learning or that you're reading here, you are very welcome to do that. And I will answer questions as best as I can.
An interesting thing that I learned recently in a class I took was that when Cyrus allowed the Jews to go back, less than half of them went back to Jerusalem, or to we now call it Israel. More than half of them stayed there.
Yeah.
And remained there for another millennium.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. That's why you have these big study centers within Babylonia and so on, right?
I have a comment or question. As far as how many times the temple was destroyed, I think it was destroyed later than this, again, under the Romans in the beginning of the Common Era.
In the year 70.
70, and then there was a brief promise to that they'd be able to rebuild, but that didn't turn out to be true. Is that true? And was that the third time then that the temple was destroyed?
The temple was destroyed 2 times.
Oh, 2.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There were a couple of false starts, but the temple was destroyed 2 times.
I see. Okay, the one is the one we just read about here, and the other one was under the Romans then.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
Can I just comment on what Steve said? Or
yeah, please.
I don't know if it's a comment, but the Jews who stayed in Babylonia must have had a really good reason, and I'm trying to think of what that is. They must have prospered in many ways, prospered financially and culturally and Jewishly.
In many ways, Cyrus was ahead of his time. He had religious tolerance. He allowed various religions to continue doing whatever they had been doing before. But he was not a modern liberal by any stretch of the imagination. We hear some horrible things he did also. But as far as in regards to the Jewish people, he allowed them to prosper. They did prosper both financially and culturally, and did for a long time after he was long gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, also it's traumatic to leave, like to uproot. They had been through so much trauma. It takes a lot to actually move, even if it is moving home.
And they also stayed because they had very good Chinese restaurants there. Anyway, that's what I heard.
Thank you for wondering.
Okay.
That's not an anachronism at all.
All right.
It's the story of our people that we go somewhere and we prosper, even in small ways. Like the Jews who went to Shanghai in the Second World War had their own little community and their businesses and their schools, and they prospered there. And it's an amazing thing of Jewishness, I think, that we prosper. We're bloom where we're planted.
Yiddish
you
Koch.
know?
Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I always thought that the Israelites who stayed in Babylon were because it was easier because they were by the water and the rivers to be able to have trade and to keep business going. And that's what I learned, I remember.
Yeah, I mean, trade was a big way that Jews were able to support one another because there were so many ways in which Jews were kept out of the economy, and there were lots of Jews who were in various different ports, and they would work with one another, and there was a whole system. So that, I think that definitely factored into this. Any other questions or thoughts on this before we look at our text? Maybe I can bring in someone who is a history scholar to talk about this in greater depth than I am able to. I am a text person. So in his commentary, Michael Fishbane explains that this week's Haftarah includes promises and assurances after the Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE, and Isaiah will prophesy about the restoration and divine mercy and covenantal promises. And we'll see that in a lot of ways in the text below. So what I'd love to do is just start diving into this text. Yeah, Jay, is there something else you wanted to say? Or is your hand up from earlier? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't overlooking you. So would anyone like to read these verses?
Well, I will.
Thank you, Jessica.
No, nobody else is. Shout, O barren one, you who bore no child. Shout aloud for joy, you who did not travail. For the children of the wife forlorn shall outnumber those of the espoused, said the Lord. Can I just stick something in here? I think of Sarah. I think of Sarah when I read that. I thought of Sarah. Okay, I'll go on.
Yeah. No, we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Okay.
That's an interesting connection.
Enlarge the site of your tent. Extend the size of your dwelling. Do not stint. Lengthen the ropes and drive the pegs firm, for you shall spread out to the right and the left. Your offspring shall dispossess nations and shall people the desolate towns.
I'm going to go down just a little bit. The way this is written poetic, it takes up a lot more room than our typical text.
If someone else wants to read that's, I'm good. Okay, fear not, you shall not be shamed. Do not cringe, you shall not be disgraced. For you shall forget the reproach of your youth and remember no more the shame of your widowhood. For he who made you will espouse you. His name is Lord of hosts. The Holy One of Israel will redeem you. He is called God of all the earth. The Lord has called.
Sorry, there we go.
The Lord has called you back as a wife forlorn and forsaken. Can one cast off the wife of his youth? That made me think of Hannah, said your God. For a little while I forsook you, but with vast love I will bring you back. In slight anger for a moment I hid my face from you, but with kindness everlasting I will take you back in love, said the Lord your Redeemer. For this to me is like the waters of Noah, as I swore that the waters of Noah never more would flood the earth. So I swear that I will not be angry with you or rebuke you.
Okay, so there's a lot in that text. And Jessica, the reason I didn't want to get into Sarah right away right there is because I knew there was a lot of other feminine imagery that was about to come, right? And so
Yes.
Why do you think Zion, people Israel here, are feminized in the way that they are in this text?
For me, the pharmacy.
There we go.
Well, isn't the metaphor of God being the husband to Israel
Mhm.
common one? Isn't it in the Song of Songs and
Absolutely.
other places?
Well, I mean, in Song of Songs, it is about the love between a woman and a man. It doesn't specifically ever mention God, but that's the symbol that's ascribed to it, is that it's about the relationship between people, Israel and God. And there's lots of other places in which that imagery takes place in our text. Absolutely. But what is it about that imagery? Like, why is that something that we go to?
Is this, I wouldn't know, but is this one of the first times that God is reaching out and expressing his love for women, because women have, maybe been repressed? I mean, their existence, not existence, but I don't mean that. Maybe God always has been talking to men, and maybe this is an example of how God is reaching out and saying that he loves women as much.
That's
Or-
interesting. What do people think about that?
I think it didn't last long, if that's the case. No.
I like what you said, Michael, because even though he sees a woman as a forlorn and forsaken wife,
Yeah.
and a kind of an image of weakness, but he still sees the woman and has empathy for her.
Right.
I like that a lot. And then he also acknowledged that maybe he had something to do with her sadness. Well, I hid my face from you. Well, but then he's sort of congratulating himself, but still, it's the empathy that I like. He does show some empathy for the woman.
Okay, so it's pointing out this discrepancy in power.
Yes.
Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Is in the first verse, the children of the wife forlorn, is that Jerusalem? Because he abandoned them, or their problems were caused because they were not following the ways of the Lord, right? What God said. And so then who is the wife espoused in the last part of that?
Wait, it's talking about people Israel. It's talking about the people, not the place.
Okay.
So but the wife forlorn is that a metaphor? That's a metaphor for the people.
Yes.
Okay, but what is espoused? Which people, or who is this?
Yeah, so this is saying like the children of the Jewish people shall outnumber this generation that is in relationship with God.
Oh,
Meaning
so
your future will be promising.
So the ones who will be redeemed and brought back, well, I see, okay.
Enlarge the site of your tent.
Mm.
You will get bigger. Don't worry. It is confusing the way it's written. Certainly. Does that make sense to people? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot clearer. Thank you.
Yeah, these literary techniques, very often things are written similarly, but in different ways. And it's like a very biblical way of writing, especially within the prophets. And sometimes we learn about the meanings of words from the parallel word that goes along with it. And so we'll see a lot of instances of that a little bit later in the text. But this idea of, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, could you give could you give an example of how we learn about the meaning of a word from the parallel things that go on with it, along with it? Just
Yeah,
to give an
well,
example.
When
Oh,
we
okay.
go a little bit later in the text, there'll be a couple
Okay.
of examples that will be clearer than what's right here. So
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, good.
So I mean, here the Jewish people are written as with a feminization. Even these metaphors, the metaphor we had last week, if we remember, of like a woman in labor being for God, that was an interesting way that femininity came into it. Here, it's the Jewish people that are the female, and that God is trying to uplift, right? So the text speaks of a glorious transformation that will replace the shame of widowhood, as the Holy One of Israel will again espouse you. And I'm kind of curious, why do you think the text, like, what does this mean? What do you make of this metaphor? And what do you think it meant for Jews of the 6th century? Transforming, glorious transformation that will replace the shame of widowhood. It's kind of strange wording. What do you think that meant at that time?
Why would it be the shame of widowhood? It's like the women did not cause the widowhood. I think that this is trying to encourage women. If you don't have the women, you don't have the Jews. You can't have children without men and women. And we recognize Jewish men and women, although we do accept other things at other times. And it's just stunning. It's almost like so many men were killed. I don't know the details of it. I don't remember them anymore. But with that many men killed, the women are really extraordinarily vulnerable also.
Okay, so you're saying during all the wars that took place, Assyrian conquer, Babylonians conquer, then later Persians conquer, right? There could be a lot of men that actually are killed, leaving the Jews in a very precarious position.
Also, the person who, the kingdom that takes over, often the king takes the women.
Yeah, Jessica. Oh, sorry, Rabbi Catherine, did you want to say something else?
No.
I have a slightly different take on this, that the shame of widowhood refers to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Carrying on the metaphor from the beginning of this verse, of this chapter.
Right, God isn't with us.
Would that then mean that you would see the temple as feminine?
Well, yes. I believe that, I don't believe, but I mean, my opinion is that the way that that these people saw God coming back to redeem them and to give them back their land and their temple was as a male figure, kind of rescuing a female figure and bringing love back to her and bringing children back to her. And so the shame of widowhood was the loss of all that. And then the espousing, the Holy One of Israel will again espouse you, not literally, but metaphorically, reattach himself to the people. Through later on, it talks about a covenant. So through marriage, through the covenant, I'm sort of babbling on here. Somebody help.
Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying, Jessica, is that the shame of widowhood written here, and the wording really I struggle with a little bit, because there's no shame in being a widow, right? But I think that what it's talking about is this loss of relationship with God, in this context, right? This
yeah.
shame that the relationship has in some way broken apart. And this promise, I will again espouse you, is saying, oh, our relationship is repairable.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's
Right,
all in the
and
language of relationship. Yeah, Rabbi Catherine.
at least
please.
women are included and acknowledged.
Right.
Through the feminine language.
Correct.
Yes, Shelley, go ahead.
Well, I think we don't look at widowhood now as being shameful. I think back in the day it was, and it was for a long time. And
Yeah.
also being barren was also that as being shameful. And it's basically because vulnerability was. And so anything vulnerable, anytime that you're not attached to something, whether it's a child, a husband, a community. And so I think what God is saying is, I'm not going to leave you orphan. I'm not going to leave you a widow. I'm bringing you back into the fold. I'm bringing you back in, like you said, into relationship. It's a beautiful metaphor, really. It's just gorgeous because everything about, like, it doesn't resonate maybe with us as much now, but then it was huge. So,
Yeah, maybe that particular metaphor doesn't ring true today, right? For all of us, but the idea of being in relationship and feeling that support, certainly, I think, is something all of us can relate to.
Mhm.
So one other piece here is in these final two verses, there's some language where it says, in slight anger for a moment, and slight anger for a moment. Interesting, right? I hid my face from you, but with kindness everlasting, I will take you back in love. So it's this kind of parallel poetry that's going on here. I had anger, that anger turns into kindness. I hid from you, I take you back in love. And then later on, when we go to verse 9 here, it says, for this to me is like the waters of Noah. And we'll talk about that because obviously that is our connection to this week's Torah portion. That's why this particular piece is chosen for this week. As I swore that the waters of Noah nevermore would flood the earth, so I swear that I will not be angry with you or rebuke you. And here we actually do have a little bit of a parallel. Floods are actually equated with anger. It's not a direct example of what I spoke about before, but it is similar. So what's the relationship between floods and anger?
Well, God was angry at the behavior of humanity at the time of Noah. And he manifested that anger with a flood, or instantiated it with a flood, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, being God, he has a lot of latitude as far as what he's going to do.
Flood?
Yeah, didn't put the Hebrew. Sorry, go ahead, Cornelia. I will get that.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking of Sodom and Gomorrah too. I mean, God was all set to angry at the inhabitants and all set to destroy the two cities until Abraham intervened. But that seems to be a pattern. You know, that when God gets angry, typically he would think in terms of sending down a flood or destroying all the inhabitants of a city. So some kind of, vast, huge sort of destruction.
God has
Yeah.
anger issues.
Yes.
He did with
God
Moses
does.
as well. Didn't when Moses came down and the golden calf and that whole episode, he was going to God was going to destroy all the people he had rescued.
Yeah, right.
Or at least had threatened to do so. Yeah, exactly. This is the Hebrew word that's used for anger.
Miksof,
Mm-hmm.
which is not any ways related to the word flood as a root or anything, or no?
Don't believe it is.
Okay.
We see the Hebrew, there's oaths, I swore. That happens twice, right? Yeah. This means like the waters of Noah, and I swear, the waters of Noah. Yeah, I mean, and Kaas is usually the word used for anger, and that does not show up here either.
Huh.
So both anger and floods, but mostly anger, can are very destructive or can lead to very destructive paths and pathways. And so if unchecked or uncontrolled.
Right, they're uncontrollable.
Uncontrolled.
That's part of their parallel. They
Well,
can totally run away with themselves.
well, maybe that's part of the lesson for all of us is to control our anger, even though it's, in situations for fear of its actions on others that we are dealing with.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and ourselves,
Yeah. I think that absolutely is part of the message here. And if we remember, even during the High Holy Days, right, there was this prayer that God gave to the Jewish people saying, hey, whenever I need to be reminded that I need to be kind, remind me of my name, remind me that I am kind, and remind me to stay away from my anger and my rebuke.
Wow. So we have to remind God?
That's what that teaching is. Yeah. Sometimes even God needs to be reminded. It definitely pushes our theology a bit, doesn't it?
Well, that really speaks of, a marriage relationship is like that.
Yeah.
The husband and the wife keep each other in check, so to speak.
We hope.
Well, it's the images of God as the Father. It's God as the children, it's God putting life into you when you were born, and starting all of that. And also the use of plagues, which God has done for more than one time in the Torah. So I think it humanizes it. I think it makes it more possible to see it within the world and life as we know it.
Right. And there'll be another instance of that I'll be talking about in my sermon on Friday as well, that I hadn't even known about until I read a few new commentaries this year. So let's look at some of these verses from Noah so that we can try to parallel these two texts and see what brings them together. Why was it so important to the rabbis that this particular section from Isaiah was paired up with Parashat Noah? I'll read this just for time purposes. I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come, and with every living thing that is with you, birds, cattle, every wild beast as well, all that have come out of the ark, every little thing on earth. I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God further said, this is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you, and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among all flesh, so that the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy the flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Okay, so we have that promise. And there's one more verse I wanted to bring in from Isaiah, where it continues with what we just read, saying, for the mountains
just-
may move. Just let me read this one thing,
Yeah,
and then
sorry,
Jessica,
sorry.
please. For the mountains may move and the hills be shaken, by my loyalty shall never move from you, nor my covenant of friendship be shaken, said the Eternal, who takes you back in love. So let's think about that for a second. Jessica, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that I noticed that God says, I will never destroy you with a flood again. That leaves the, wide open.
I hope that we can expand from that, right? Fair point. But what is the parallel here? What are we meant to get from these verses?
Well, I think one issue is, or pattern is that God remembers, God recalls. Like, I mean, that comes up a lot of times in the Noah passage. He keeps saying, I'm going to remember. The bow is going to remind me. You even need some kind of mnemonic to remember. And then, anyway, and then, and here, of course, he refers back to that promise too with Noah. So I think that's kind of interesting, that idea that God's memory maybe needs a little jolt sometimes. But I mean, or not so much that, but I don't know, maybe it's also a struggle when you're angry at someone. It's a little hard to remember that you made a promise to them, like having an agreement with them.
Yeah, the rabbis compare it to like wearing tzitzit, for example. Like we always know that we should act as good people. But sometimes if we're in the midst of a moment that emotions get away from us, but we're wearing tzitzit and we happen to glance down and we notice those tzitzit, it might remind us in that moment to recenter ourselves. The rabbis speak of it in those kind of terms. Thank you. Any other thoughts here about the underlying message and the connection?
Just one more little tiny thought. The people at the time of Isaiah 54 had read and knew the story of Noah, and understood that when their world was destroyed, God came back and said, I'm with you still, and I won't do this again. And their world in Isaiah 50, their world had been destroyed. So I think they looked to the Noah story for some relief that it would happen to them too. And maybe that accounts for why this is, the parallel is there.
Yeah, it's a source of hope for them. Beautiful. Is there anyone else I'm missing who wanted to say something?
I'm just thinking, when we have Moses, we have somebody who is intimately involved with God on almost a daily category. But with Noah and also with Babylon and all of those, as God is not present in the same way and doesn't have the same, there's Moses is the only link who goes on and on and on for many years. It never happens again. So for God to, through the prophets, put this out, it reminds you that God is there, God does take care of you. Otherwise you say, we don't have a Moses. And I think people did say that for a while there, quite a while.
Yeah, God is with you. Sharon, did you want to say something? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. We can't hear you.
My audio. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sitting here wondering who put the rainbow in the sky.
Well, according to this, God did.
So he reminded himself by putting the rainbow in the sky.
Reminder to himself.
Yeah, just like we might purchase tzitzit so that we can have a reminder of our innermost values.
Certainly makes God more human.
Do we want him to be more human?
It's a very good question.
He does call us our children. He does do all of that stuff. So why wouldn't we think? I mean, I don't know anyone who's never been angry. And as I get older, I know a lot of people who need to be reminded, starting with myself. It's like, oh, where did I put that piece of paper with that note? You know, oh, it's up in the sky in 5 different colors. Really cool.
We only could do that, right? Yeah. So there are all of these really interesting reminders. And one of the most important things that we have between these two texts as well is this idea of a covenant, a brit, right? That's repeated over and over again. And so we can actually ask, what does it mean to be in covenant with God? God is saying, I won't forget. I will be reminded of my covenant with you. And here again, like, but my loyalty shall never move from you, nor my covenant of friendship be shaken. By the way, this is an example of what I said before, this literary technique. So we have, but my loyalty is coupled with this idea of covenant. And here we have, never move from you, and this coupled with the idea of friendship be shaken. So what this is teaching us is that covenant, a brit, has something to do with loyalty.
It's kind of loyalty going in both directions also.
Yes.
It's relational. Yeah, Cornelia, were you going to say that
That's
as
kind
well?
of what I was going to say. Yes, that it's people also, we have a covenant, we have an agreement with God, and God has an agreement with us. Yeah, I think that's it's eminently relational.
Yeah, that's a big part of this entire thing. The Sephardic Haftarah portion ends right here. That's the entire Haftarah for Sephardim, is those 10 verses, okay? But the Ashkenazi one goes on a bit longer and includes a few other components. So I want us just to have a little bit of time to look at some of those texts. I'm just going to read this quickly again, just because of time. Unhappy, storm-tossed one, uncomforted. I will lay carbuncles as your building stones and make your foundations of sapphires. Again, building stones, sapphires, carbuncles, whatever that is, and foundations. I will make your battlements of rubies, your gates of precious stones. That's another parallel right there. The whole encircling wall of gems. And all of your children shall be disciples of the eternal, and great shall be the happiness of your children. You shall be established through righteousness, shall be safe from oppression, and shall have no fear from ruin. It shall not come near you. Surely no harm can be done without my consent. Whoever would harm you shall fall because of you. It is I who created the smith to fan the charcoal fire and produce the tools for his work. So it is I who create the instruments of havoc. No weapon formed against you shall succeed, and every tongue that contends with you at law you shall defeat. Such is the lot of the servants of the Eternal, such is the triumph through me, declares the Eternal. So what is going on in this text?
Oh, boy.
God just admitted that God made tools of havoc, the weapons, the atomic bomb.
I'm not quite sure it's saying that, but but God is saying, I have ultimate control here. Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying we all know, I mean, just from listening and reading this, that all these promises have been essentially broken over time with all that we do to one another and have done over the millennia. So
Yeah, we break our promises to God, and God sometimes breaks promises to us. There's also a lot of metaphor here of building,
Yeah.
right? All of these various things to build or to rebuild. That is paralleled with this idea of destruction. These, instruments of havoc and weapons and stuff that will not be effective against you, right? And what's kind of interesting, there's a text of Talmud that we're about to get to that actually looks at one word in particular from verse 13, which is your children. Yeah, Benayich. Okay, and the reason it looks at this word is that it looks very, very similar to the Hebrew word for building. Comes from a similar root. And so the rabbis say, Rabbi Eliezer said that Rabbi Hanina said, Torah scholars increase peace in the world, as it is said, and all your children, Benayich, shall be taught of the eternal, and great shall be the peace of your children. If all the children of Israel are taught of the eternal, there will be peace for all. The sages interpreted this verse homiletically. Do not read your children, Benayich, but your builders, Bonayich. So essentially saying the building of our community is based on future generations and the tools that we give them in order to create a world that we want for them. There is hope in them. So it's adding in this other element of that, this idea of building and promise and creating something positive out of a negative. Yeah, Shelley.
I also think that this is not just, like you say, it's metaphoric, but I think it points to the fact that this promise goes beyond the physicality, beyond our life in the here and now. It's not just our life, it's our children's, it's the future, but it's also our children's future and their children. And then beyond that, beyond our own physicality. So I think there's hope in that building. What looks like destruction, he's talking to us about, being the destroyed ones, the forgotten ones, so all of that. But we're not really. He's still in our court. We're still friends. We're still going. He's going to see us, even with all of this. We will be redeemed. We will be seen through. So I think it's a lot of hope in it.
So the very last sentence, I don't know if it was read, but means a lot to me. No, of that, but not
all of this.
Torah scholars are those who build peace for their generation, rather than just study about it, but they act their actions as in tikkun olam are what count, rather than just all that they study. Who build, the word build to me says a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Cornelia.
I like, Michael, what you said, and it's sort of a paradox too, because building is usually an eminent physical activity.
Right.
But here it's verbal. But I also wanted to ask, is Judaism perhaps the most textually oriented religion that existed at this time? And I don't even know any other religion that is this textually oriented. And it seems that has to do with Judaism's strength over the many, many years or eons it has existed, the existence of those Torah builders.
Yeah, at the time, remember that when the temple was destroyed, the temple had been the entire center of Jewish life and community and spirituality, everything. And so when the temple was destroyed, really Judaism could have just ceased to be. And there are many nations where something like that happened, and it did cease to be, right? The marvel of Judaism was that there was this ability to adapt. And it was through Jewish text, and then also through prayer in a way that didn't exist at this time, where the Jewish people really were able to hold on to the core of who we are. And so it became the stand-in for the temple in a lot of ways. And this brachot was written later. So the Talmud started to be put together around 2nd century. It was actually finished around the 6th century, maybe a little bit earlier, depending on what scholar you speak to. But this is many, many, many years after Isaiah is written, of course. Because that's CE, not BC. Let's look at this final text. This is the last piece from the Haftarah this week. It says, "Ho, all who are thirsty, come for water. Even if you have no money, come buy food and eat. Buy food without money, wine and milk without cost. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, your earnings for what does not satisfy? Give heed to me, and you shall eat choice food and enjoy the richest vineyards. Incline your ear and come to me, hearken, and you shall be revived, and I will make with you an everlasting covenant, the enduring loyalty promised to David. And I will make him a leader of peoples, a prince and commander of peoples. So you shall summon a nation you do not know, and a nation that did not know you shall come running to you. For the sake of the eternal your God, the Holy One of Israel, who has glorified you." What is going on in these verses?
Is God speaking out against worshiping other gods? Why do you spend money for what is not bread? Perhaps your earnings for what does not satisfy?
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's worship of something outside of God.
Yeah. Which is a waste of effort and money on the part of us.
Mm-hmm.
Because from God we could get it for nothing. Well, not for nothing, but
Only ask
not
your
for
devotion.
money.
In exchange for your devotion.
Right. Focus your energy where it actually needs to be, to what really matters. And you'll find that all the things that you've been chasing for, you'll feel more fulfilled. I think that this message is pretty relevant. Yeah. Steve, do you want to say something else?
No.
I have a word.
Yeah, please, Irv.
Hello, everybody. Sorry I was late. These are kind of words that cult leaders use. In my view, this is something to attract a group, and that's what I sense out of this particular paragraph.
No,
Yeah, I know Jim Jones. I remember people signed over all their worldly possessions to him, and other cult leaders like that did the same thing. Interesting point. Yeah.
well, to me, it metaphorically says, yeah, we instead of seeking out the water and the food and all that stuff by studying the Torah and learning about God and how we should live our lives, and that is really the sustenance we need to live by, rather than what on the surface appears to be the basics of food. I mean, if you're unethical but you're well fed, it's not as important as to be trying to emulate God in your life and be a little hungry.
Yeah, the power that sometimes we as human beings, we have a need for something, a yearning for something of meaning. And it can be so easy to be, kind of swayed this way or that into things that actually don't fulfill us, especially today where there's ads everywhere for everything that make promises that aren't based on reality, right? But that real meaning can come from diving into the heart of our tradition, and that's going to give us a kind of fulfillment that some of these other fleeting things will not. There's a lot of power in that. There's one other piece that I just wanted to bring in here in terms of literary techniques, that sometimes there's specific words that are brought up many, many times within the text. And I'll show you the examples of this in a second. And so there are two words that appeared a lot, especially in the text right before that last paragraph. One of them is lo, which means no or do not do this. And the other is ki, which means because or for this purpose. And so, let's see, where are all those examples? So here we see he shows up, or in the English, you'll see the word for sometimes, but many, many times it'll say do not. So we have lots of low right here.
First line, there's a low.
There's a low right here. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it's saying like no harm can be done. And I wish I could highlight them. When I tried to highlight them, it screwed up the formatting of everything. So I had to undo it, which makes this a lot harder to see. I did make an effort. It just didn't work as planned. But what do you make of that kind of a literary technique of don't do this for, like, I will do this? Let me try to find a good example of the for. So you can see that in 14. So it's here, for you shall be safe from oppression. Doesn't use the word for in this translation, which is even harder to see, but
Is this the way a parent talks to a child, perhaps, or to an extent?
say more about that.
We as parents protect our children in every way we can, and we try to teach them the right ways to live, and we want them to feel that they are, safe. In our crazy world, they're not necessarily, but I mean, certainly this is the object or of the mission of parents to instill right from wrong in children. Don't do this, but do this.
Yeah, and there's two messages in that, right? One is a message of consequence. Our actions have consequences.
Right.
We didn't do what we should have. It hurt our relationship with God. Now we need to come back together. Don't go after all of this food that's not going to fulfill you. Do what really matters, because there's consequences to our actions. We're in a covenant with consequence, that we are there for one another, right? And the second piece is every low is followed by a key. And the idea there is also that we're moving from not doing something to the promise of what can happen. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
I was confused by the carbuncles, which apparently you were too, because carbuncles to me is abscess, a skin abscess. But I looked it up. It also means a garnet, a semi-precious stone. So I think that's the context it means here.
Yes, that's exactly right. The translation that I was working from in my book had a different word there. What did it use?
A garnet is what I saw here.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I've met
Out of the boil.
during my travels, as I was aging, I met people who had turned away from faith because of, there was always this promise, but where were they when I needed them? Times like the Holocaust or terrible times like that famine, things that people just, what did I do to deserve this? And where were you when I needed you? So to them, this rings hollow now. So I think it needs more. If you're talking about our children or children's children or what you want to pass on. It has to be more nuanced than that. I think you just can't read this and take it at face value. You have to do something with it, at least over time.
Yeah, but Irv, I think that is exactly what this text is responding to, is exactly what you're saying, right? Because these are a people who have just gone through absolute destruction of the temple. They've just gone through so many people that they knew were killed, maybe family members, maybe they were hurt themselves, they were uprooted. They've gone through hell, right? And this text is saying, let's remain in relationship with God. We messed up, God messed up, but ultimately, let's dive into our relationship and believe in the promise of tomorrow. God made a mistake with the flood, and yet somehow good was able to come from the destruction of the earth. And so too can there be hope, even in times of sorrow, even in times of hardship, that we can rebuild relationships and create a life of meaning and purpose. And maybe that doesn't speak to us. All of us have to decide what to do with that, but that is what the message of the text is trying to do. Any final thoughts on any of this before we close out for today?
I just think it's important to just keep on hanging in and keep on being in touch like we do each week in this class, and other ways reinforce what is possible. And that's where I get my enthusiasm to keep thinking with an attitude of gratitude.
Mm-hmm. And that's our rainbow up in the sky, right? Our reminder of exactly that. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this Torah study. We'll get together next week for Parashat Lech Lecha, and we'll be studying Isaiah chapter 40. So we'll still be within Isaiah. It'll just be a little bit earlier within the book. So I look forward to seeing you then, if not before.
You gotta sing the Noah song
Thank
at
you.
Friday night services like we used to do in the good old days.
Depends what Noah song you're talking about.
Noah, he built him an arky.
I don't know. I didn't see that on the cue sheet. You'll have to talk to Alon about that. Maybe he'll add that in.
He always did that years ago. Anyway.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Back to my camp times that summer.